Mody, and I do need my notes too. She's going to talk to us about art-based practices, research, and transformation. Monica.
Thank you very much. So, like Heidi, who was so effortless and amazing in her presentation, I am going to read mostly off my laptop because for some reason my printer stopped working this morning. So I was like, okay, fine. I'll read it off the laptop. The paper that I'll be reading is very much a draft, a work in progress. So comments and feedback very much welcome. This is my first time presenting, I guess, at CIIS, and I'm very nervous and also grateful. And the last 3 or 4 days I've been thinking, for some reason I've been thinking a lot about where I was exactly a year ago and how wonderful it is to be in this place, even though I have no idea how the next few months will unfold, but right now I'm here at CIIS and it's great. So yeah, some of you might know that I write poetry, and so for me this topic of the role of art is in the academy is very, very central to how I think of scholarship, how I think of poetry, how I think of transformation or spirituality, and so that's why I wanted to bring all of those things together. I'm using the word art broadly here to include all artistic forms such as written, visual, performative, sound, movement, intermedia. So art doesn't necessarily refer only to visual art. And interestingly, or rather synchronistically, I opened the website of Seed magazine yesterday. Seed is a magazine dedicated to environmental issues, and the lead article was a story about integrating the arts and the sciences. And here's a short quote from the story. As John Maida, president of the Rhode Island School of Design, puts it, I've begun to wonder recently whether STEM, and STEM is an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics within academics, needs something to give it some steam. An A for art between the engineering and the math, to ground the bits and the bytes in the physical world between us, to lift them up and to make them human. Patricia Levy defines arts-based research practices as a set of methodological tools used by qualitative researchers during all phases of social research, including data collection, analysis, interpretation, and representation. Now, arts-based research may be new in the context of contemporary academic research, but artists have had a long familiarity with research. For instance, Picasso said, "I never made a painting as a work of art, it's all research." Within academia, and I see the Western academic models as influential enough globally to not deconstruct their power to represent the other for now. In academia, the Cartesian-Kantian philosophical assumptions with their objectivist, rationalist, materialist worldview have long held sway. But the work of philosophers such as Rick Tarnas is beginning to dismantle them. Unfortunately, the politics of knowledge creation within the academia are ambiguous, and Heidi spoke a little bit to that. And the research agendas of academic researchers are often determined not by their considered responsibilities to fellow humans and to the world, but by the stringencies of grants. So, now that we are breaking out of cognizantrism, let's look at some approaches that are trying to reimagine what knowledge is. So, recognizing the multidimensional nature of human cognition, participatory theories, spearheaded by Jorge, advance an integrated holistic paradigm in which the mind is seen as an equal partner in the exploration and the elaboration of knowledge to the heart, the body, the erotic, the imagination, and the mystical. Complexity theories of education describe learning as a participation in the world, a co-evolution of knower and known that transforms both. They tell us learning is non-linear, dynamic, and relational. Learning occurs within communities of practice and within a social world and webs of interconnection. Scholar Lemke argues that meaning arises not just in the fact of action and the type of action, but also in the how of action. So knowledge, meaning is provisional. Now these changing understandings of the process of human cognition and learning and the nature of knowledge necessitate innovations in methodological practices. Just as the emergence of qualitative research in the 20th century indicated a shift in how we understand and represent what it is to be human, the so-called emergent methods in qualitative research pick up on our changing understandings of the human experience and the desire to interject this complexity into the discourse of the academy. As Ron Pelias puts it, arts-based texts are methodological calls, writings that mark a different space. They collect in the body, an ache, a fist, a soup. Arts started emerging as a mode of inquiry and representation in the field of educational research in Canada and the US in the 1970s. And by the 1990s, certain methodological practices had evolved that signaled the improving place of arts within an expanding qualitative research paradigm. The work of Tom Barone, Arda Cole, Elliot Eisner, Rita Irwin, Gary Knowles, Sean McNiff, and Stephanie Springay has been particularly influential in developing the fields of arts-based research, seeking to reinfuse art, of course, art needs to be reinfused into research, seeking to reinfuse research with passion and vigor and rigor to re-enchant academia. These scholars have written about different facets of the role of the arts in qualitative research, such as the relationship between arts and knowledge, the relationship between arts-based methods and other research methods, and that between arts-based methods and the arts, the strengths of art-based practices, and the challenges of bringing together the arts and qualitative research. There are different theoretical positions and approaches taken by different practitioners, and this, according to Elliot Eisner, is how things should be, since the goal is to achieve complementarity rather than methodological hegemony. So, despite all of this, despite all the possibilities they open up, arts-based practices remain contentious and contested within academy, which is not too far-fetched because the academy is a slow-moving, slow-changing institution. So let me just share with you one particular theoretical formulation of arts-based research, which is called artography, where ART stands for artist, researcher, teacher, and I'm sharing this particular theorization of an arts-based methodology with you because the concepts of methodology that they highlight really ring true to me in terms of what is needed today in academia as within a larger enterprise of knowledge. So Rita Irwin writes, to be engaged in the practice of artography means to inquire in the world through an ongoing process of art making in any art form and writing, not separate or illustrative of each other, but interconnected and woven through each other to create additional and or enhanced meanings. Artographical work are often rendered through the concepts of contiguity, lived inquiry, openings, metaphor, metonymy, reverberations, and excess, which are enacted and presented or performed within a relational when a relational aesthetic inquiry condition is envisioned as embodied understanding and exchanges between the art and the text, and between and among the broadly conceived identities of artist, researcher, and teacher. Many art methodologists point to the usefulness of arts-based methods for researching experience. You know, how do we figure out, how do we understand this, what we go, our feelings, our experience, the sensations, affects, intensities that make up the field of human experience. Scholars such as Susan Langer, Rudolf Anheim, and Nelson Goodman have theorized the cognitive significance of art. For example, Susan Langer writes, she represents the arts as symbols capable of providing a unique knowledge of human feeling. But within the participatory context, and I'm bringing the participatory context here because I think that has a lot, I'm trying to somehow bring depth psychology and psyche together with participatory methodologies, and I see the psyche itself as participatory. So Ferrer has repositioned experiences as events that are co-created with and inactive of an unfolding reality. The intrasubjective is embedded in and participating in a matrix of connectedness. In the creation of art, in drawing on something other than us, we recreate the other. We recreate the self and the other, the lines between whom are not so strongly drawn to begin with. A simplified relational epistemology would say the inside is outside after all. Psyche is porous to and continuous with what lies outside it, human and non-human, collective and cosmic. Psyche, consciousness, also interpenetrates matter. Such an understanding of an ontological reality recasts how we understand the insideness and the outsideness of the totality that is psyche. The problematic of knowledge is, after all, the relationship or the relationships between the inside and the outside. As the inside and the outside co-create new or changed relationships, as they co-create each other, from that fold, new knowledges emerge. Heisig writes that the totality of the psyche is not unintelligible, but only inexhaustibly intelligible. Such an open, mysterious, complex totality asks of the bounded rationality of our ego consciousness that it be apprehended through ongoing inquiry, through multiple inquiries, through multiple ways of inquiry. Methodologies inhabiting liminal, contested spaces like arts-based inquiry are particularly meaningful when it comes to such meanings. And once we are on board with the co-creative nature of knowledge, it is not in relational nature of knowledge, it is not difficult to accept the arts-based practices that they not only use innovative methodologies, but they also create new knowledges not possible under more conventional accounts and concepts of research. So I'm not away, but I want to quote an anthropologist now, one of the more conventional domains of knowledge there are out there. So anthropologist Johannes Fabian writes, much of our ethnographic research is carried out best when we are out of our minds. That is, while we relax our inner controls, forget our purposes, let ourselves go. In short, there is an ecstatic side to fieldwork, which should be counted amongst the conditions of knowledge productions, hence of objectivity. Now, Fabian's redefinition of objectivity is fascinating because it shows the desire of academia to change the very way in which certain buzzwords in research discourse are deployed. And this resignification leaves objectivity as something vulnerable, permeable, open to collaboration with what is outside and would be conventionally termed as subjective. The methodology of letting go advocated by Fabian is something artists are familiar with. Whether it is John Keats' bidding that artists cultivate the capability of remaining negative in the sense of being able to resist the instinctive clinging to certitude, resolution, and closure. Or Jack Spicer's notion of poetry as dictation, allowing one to escape what he called the big lie of the personal. There is a recognition that stepping out of the way allows art of a different quality to come through. Now, of course, the personal is not just a big lie to be stepped away from. In fact, it is a dynamic co-creator with mystery, but it becomes too often identified with an ego mind vested in setting up strict, rigid regimes of control. Personality aligned with and co-creating with the self allows for creativity that is more than itself. Wordsworth claimed, we see into the heart of things in that state. And for Barfield, the poet is Zeus. He has swallowed the heart of the world, and he can reproduce it in a living body. As the separation of the inner from the outer dissolves, there is a dying, an expansion, the seeing of connections, a knowing, a becoming. Ferrer and Sherman write that all acts of human knowing have an interpretive and ontological element. Interpretation, it does not exhaust being, they write, but invites us into the adventures of ontological transformation and relation. Art is sacred because of its intentionality, not intentionality in the sense that the artist knows what she wants to create and sets out to create it, but in the sense of its ritualistic aspect, as a conscious engagement with form and content, with the inside and the outside, with light and shadow, with the self and the other, with facile and difficult. Once created, the intensities and folds in art carry the energy of psyche, the psychic energy. As Ferrer and Sherman point, signs and texts are not only human artifacts, but beings thick with their own creational weight. So once there is a creative output, or during the process of creative output, creativity itself becomes a conduit for divine creativity, for cosmic creativity. I wanted to end with with a story about an alternate way in which the academy or any school could function. Anthropologist Denise Nuttall has an essay about becoming an apprentice to a tabla player. She was an apprentice first to Alaraka Khan and later on, once he passed, to his son Ustad Zakir Hussain. As her practice started intensifying, her guru, Zakir Hussain, began to enter her dream world. A phenomenon that she writes is common amongst the tabla communities, both in India and in the US and Canada. In the dream, the guru continues to teach his disciples as they sleep. She calls them indigenous ways of knowing, but she also says that these ways of knowing taught her anthropological lessons that she had not anticipated learning. Questions?
I have a very general one that I don't even know how to ask it, but perhaps just, I don't know how it quite relates to the theoretical aspects, but as a poet, how do you see technique as part of this process that you're talking about, the learning of technique?
Talking about as part of this methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are actually different perspectives out there on this. There are some writers and scholars who believe that there should be a substantial time spent in training, and that only people who are experts should be able to engage in these forms of methodological practice. And there is an opposite view And I think we also need to think about our turning back to the domain of expertise as something that holds us safely. This is, the academy has always fostered experts or an expert knowledge as something that holds authority over.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the usefulness of arts-based research practices is really wide, and there are people who've used them with teenagers in researching, in investigating their own experiences. So these kids did not have any of those so-called tools of poetry, and yet
Right.
they managed to do something with the tools of art. So I think there is a place, but I think I'm also for me, I have a training, which is something that I thought was interesting at first, that I am a poet, so I can use these tools, but now my view is changing a little bit, and I'm seeing these in a slightly different way.
Could you just, so how is that changing?
Because I think these tools have a usefulness for a much larger community of people who may not relate to the arts as artists, but I think the arts have a multivalent role in society.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thank you.
So would RAT be an example of what you're talking about?
Would sorry?
RAT, RAT.
It can be, definitely, yeah. I think any form of art is potentially a tool of inquiry. It's also about how it's used. I think there has to be some amount of self-reflectiveness. I wouldn't say that just because somebody is using, say, the information that is out there in society, or using it in an activist way, that it becomes a tool within, for academic research. Because I think it is important to articulate, your research question, your goals, and things like that. It is important to think through those things before you embark. And of course, once you step into that realm of mystery, then then there's you and whatever's coming through to you. So.
Could you say a little bit about the potential of arts-based research and practice to address what I see as a pendulum swing in academia and other places? Almost as though it goes over to the art side for a while, and then it's all experiential, and let's just come to our lose our mind, come to our senses, and that kind of thing. And then it tends to swing over to the other side, which is the dominant mode in this country of intellectualism without soul and body and all that. How can what you're talking about keep Apollo and Dionysus on good terms as brothers?
I think just the fact that they bring two very, very different discourses together means that since they're occupying, as I mentioned, this contested liminal space, the fact is that they're already trying to do some of that. They're trying to make sure that research and, even the intellect is not something that's dried out, distanced, autonomous, and placed out there as something that you can observe on a slide or something like that. So by just re-infusing, reanimating, re-enchanting that entire process, I think it would, and recognizing that there are many different ways in which that can happen. People are still evolving these methodologies. So I think all of this openness is, one way to do that.
Have you used art in your own research?
Yeah, I've been researching my psyche. No, well, I started doing it very consciously in the last few months, and I have, and I am focusing, and for me, the subject of the topic of research for me right now is psyche. So that's what I'm looking at, and I've been looking at writing a series of myths of things that we, feel so much about at CIS. What is the soul? What is the spirits? What is cosmos? And things like that. And what is my relationship to those things? And what is my psyche's relationship to those things? So that's my project right now. And if I'd had time, I would have read a couple of these things, but maybe not.
We have a couple more minutes for other questions and comments. Anyone have them?
Is there a particularly intriguing arts-based research project that you've come across recently, or one that just really surprised you or set you on fire that you can share with us?
There was I'm forgetting the name of it. Anyway, the name doesn't matter. But I read these incredibly beautiful poems by a woman looking into her relationship with her mother, which were, I think the texture of them were was really incredible. But in terms of striking practices, there's visual media out there. There's photographs and sorry, nothing is coming up right now. But I could maybe think about it and get back to
It's a field that's just exploding everywhere.
yeah.
I was in YouTube the other day and I saw somebody from a pretty traditional scientific program, and they were dancing as part of their dissertation out in the field.
Yeah.
It was a chemistry dissertation.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.